What did you do as a teenager that you will never tell your parents? Set up. Sister is 4 years older than I, straight as an arrow. The type of sibling who enjoyed snitching on her younger brother. No worries. She's away at college. I am the exact opposite. Always in trouble. Always playing it fast and loose. I'm a senior in high school. I'm holding down a job, getting decent grades, and my parents decide that they can finally trust me enough to take a vacation and leave me in the house. They hire a house sitter, John, who doesn't care what I do as long as I don't burn the place down. On a fine Saturday morning, I wake up, pour myself a drink from my father's locked booze stash and put on some porn. I'm wearing a pair of underwear and nothing else. 10 minutes later, surprise. My sister walks through the door. Fortunately, I hear the car just in time to shut off the porn and throw a blanket around my mostly naked and fully erect body parts. Sis notices, of course, that I'm hanging out in the living room, wrapped up in a blanket, face red as a beet. Hey, didn't know you were coming home, I'm gonna jump in the shower? End of story, right? Wrong. Sis finds my drink, spiked with dad's booze. I'd finished it off, but she detected the smell of booze. Unbeknownst to me, she wraps the cup in saran wrap, sealing in the smell. She writes my parents a note, telling them how she found the cup next to my chair when she popped in for a surprise visit. She places the cup and the note in my parents' bathroom. A couple of days pass. I'm preparing for my parents' imminent return by cleaning the house. I find the note in the cup, hidden away. Not only does it implicate me, it implicates John, the house sitter. Seems that my sister also found a stash of condoms and lube elsewhere in the house. I read it. I'm beside myself. I take the saran wrap off the cup, rinse it, and replace the contents with plain Coke. I then show the note to John, the house sitter. John, well, she's a bit on edge. The condoms are mine. Just part of my overnight kit. Why was she snooping through my things? Me, yeah. The rest was like watching a predictable yet perfectly choreographed movie. My parents arrive home. John pulls them aside to talk about the note in the cup. They sniff the cup, smell nothing. They read the note, and interpret it as paranoid delusion. My sister gets a stern lecture on the dangers of snooping and invading the privacy of others. And I, the 17-year-old drunk who nearly got caught jerking off in the living room, get an apology from my parents. My lips are sealed, forever. My time to shine. My senior year of high school, I snuck out of the house at like 2 a.m. to get some. My parents were a little psycho and put bells on the front and back doors, in case of burglars. But they didn't put them on the laundry room door, which led to the garage. The garage had a side door in it that led outside, so obviously that was my way out. The problem with that side door is that it's a bit hard to tell when it's locked since you can always get out but not necessarily back in. So, me being stupid and horny, just assumed it was fine and went along my merry way. Did the deed then when I tried to get back and I found the door locked. I tried every other possible entrance. All locked, but I had my phone and an idea so crazy it just might work. I called my mom and in my best helpless daughter voice cried, "Mommy, I woke up in the front yard and the door is locked. I'm so scared." She came right out and got me. I mumbled something about sleepwalking. Then she made me waffles since I was so distressed. My mom still tells the story at family get-togethers. I now have a reputation as a crazy sleepwalker. I'm way late to this, but I'd like to admit this. In high school my mom was really broke. Me and my sister lived with her, and we had recently moved into a house with my mom's new boyfriend. He had been such a cool guy until we all moved in together. He stopped paying his share of rent and utilities, and my mom, who was and still is woefully underpaid, was covering everything herself, including food for the whole house, all of our phone bills, and her car payments/insurance. Money was so very hard to come by for us. Just getting by was becoming a way of life for us. Winter came along and the temperatures dropped below 30 degrees Celsius. Mom worked mornings and her boyfriend refused to drive us anywhere before noon, so we had to figure something out. My dad decided to step in still in our lives. We just don't live with him and we hardly saw him until this point, and drive my sister to school. She was in grade 10 and had decided to stay at the same school as she had been for the years earlier. I wanted to change and went to a closer school, still a 20 to 30 minute walk, but far closer than hers. The winter was sapping my energy and making me sick on my long walks to and from school. Something had to be done. Mom got me a bus pass. She saved up and spent $100 on it for 4 months of busing. It was so much easier than walking and made my life so much better. I was so relieved to not be walking. I had a medical issue with my testicles. Walking was getting pretty hard. But that's another story. The part that I'll never tell her? I lost it within a week. I cannot figure out how. Maybe it was stolen or it fell out of my wallet on the bus. I don't know. I was so sad and felt so unbelievably guilty that I had refused to tell her. I kept my schedule the same and left when I normally would to catch the bus. But instead of busing I turned down a side street and rushed as fast as my half-frozen legs and balls would go without killing my stamina. I barely made it to my classes on time for 4 months. All the way into spring when it started warming up. When the pass would have expired, I was surprised one morning to find a new one left out for me. My mom put money away each paycheck for all that time because she thought the bus meant so much to me. It was very touching and I thanked her, gave her a kiss on the head and acted like it was normal. I still feel so wrong about it. And I don't ever want to tell her. She tried so hard for me, and I just want her to feel like a great mom, because she deserves it. I'm not proud of this anymore, but after I realized that my parents had stashed all the liquor behind the washer and dryer, I totally started taking a few shots here and there. Once my friends found out I had access to my parents' redneck liquor cabinet, we overdid it one weekend at the beach, and I panicked because this time I knew my parents would notice. But I also had to pee, and there were no public restrooms at that beach, so I went behind a sand dune and peed in a fast food cup, then poured it back into my dad's mostly empty rum bottle. Drunken teenage logic decided that I'd had enough rum that day, that I had just been borrowing it from good old dad, so I gave it back. I'll never know if my parents used the rum for anything, but what I can say for sure is that they attended a party every January and brought their own homemade brew which was part rum. Snuck out of the house with a friend, while I was staying over with her, to meet a group of boys. She hooked up with one of them in a truck while the rest of us, me and the other two guys, hung around in the desert at night trying not to notice the truck rocking back and forth. I must have been 14 or so. Never did anything like that before or since. I went with her because I was afraid she'd get in trouble with the boys by herself, so I wanted to watch over her. We got caught by her parents, who told me they were going to tell my parents. I prepared to be grounded for life. Then her dad changed his mind and told me I was a good kid and he would let this one go, but we had better not sneak out of his house again. Needless to say, he went through this a lot with his daughter. I never told my parents and never will, lol, and I'm 28 now. When I was about 15, I took half an eighth of mushrooms and maybe 8 or more quercetin pills and went downstairs to watch a movie with my parents. My parents were always fighting back then. They really hated each other and I hated them as well, but for some reason, that night was very pleasant. We were all laughing and joking and having a genuinely good time. Meanwhile, the walls around them were breathing and the carpet was swirling beneath me. I was having trouble focusing on their faces. That would be the quercetin, but I wasn't in the least bit paranoid that they may know I was high. It was an extremely strange night. My dad and I are friends now and we've talked about our drug use when we were younger. He was getting high in his room while I was getting high in mine, and angrily taking my weed when he caught me and smoking it himself. Apparently my mom was the one who was adamantly anti-drug. Dad just put on a show for her sake, but for some reason, I've never mentioned that night to him. Was trying to convince my dad to buy me a new computer for college. He doesn't exactly like the fact that I play video games due to the Asian/Middle Eastern mentality of study till you die, but I'd been doing it for so long he begrudgingly accepted it after realizing it wasn't just a phase. However, he made it clear that he would only buy a computer for the express purpose of helping me get a computer science degree. Shocker, right? Unfortunately, he wasn't tech savvy at all, so I searched online stores until I found a laptop that I wanted to replace my old Yachty one with. It was an $800 Asus gaming laptop with middle-of-the-road specs for the time. There was no way he would ever buy me a laptop that was built for the express purpose of gaming. So I used Inspect Element to replace all instances of the word gaming on the product page with the word studying and made sure not to reload the page when showing it to him. It would change the words back into gaming. It worked, and within 1 week I got my new studying computer. When I was 18 I flew to Portugal to meet my boyfriend at the time, who was over there for the summer. One day we decided, fake it. This particular city is cool, but let's go exploring. So we packed up our belongings, walked out to the edge of the city, and started hitchhiking. About a week and a half later we've passed through Portugal, Spain, and most of France, and my scumbag boyfriend decides he needs to find himself or some bullshit and dumps me in a petrol station in eastern France. So I wind up staying with some lovely Buddhists who are on a retreat in the mountains, then hitch various lifts back to Spain, and fly home. When I got home my parents asked me if I got up to anything fun. I said we did some traveling by train. I'm almost 30 now and it's still a secret. It's an interesting story, but I was so fucking lucky it went relatively okay. I could have been one of those kids who goes missing or gets murdered. Not me, but my cousin. His parents go away for the weekend with explicit instructions not to take the boat out. As soon as they round the corner, he's pulling the boat out of the garage. My cousin, Tim, and his friend, Eric, go to a local lake to go water skiing. Eric is pulling Tim behind the boat and Eric starts to go in circles to make waves for Tim to jump. Eric is sitting on the edge of the boat while driving, so he can more easily look back to make sure Tim hasn't fallen. The boat hits a big wave and Eric is tossed out of the boat. Now, the boat is going in circles with Tim skiing behind it and nobody driving. It is getting closer and closer to the docks with each pass. Eventually, Tim swings wide and swims as hard as he can to get out of the water before the boat comes back around. Someone on one of the docks sees what is going on and jumps in the boat and shuts it off, just as it scrapes one of the docks. They took the boat home, had a buddy repair the scratches, and never said a word to my aunt and uncle. Well, I was a pretty good kid growing up. Didn't smoke, drink, do drugs or even have sex growing up. I just never felt the need to. However, this one time I was about 14 years old, pretty developed, more so than my friends, and I constantly had attention from boys, and especially boys much older than me. I was going into my freshman year of high school and the senior took an interest in me. Many nights of AOL chats and we were hooked on one another. Thing was, he was almost 19. Clearly I couldn't tell my dad that he was just barely 14 years old and wanted to date a man. So I did what any kid would do. Said I was going to a friend's house and from there her and I double dated to a movie. Dude had his tongue down my throat the entire film, and kept trying to feel me up. When he begged me to sesh I kinda dropped him. I did that exact scenario probably 4 or 5 times my freshman year. So yeah, my dad will never find out about all the grown-as men I was kissing up to in my freshman year of high school while he thought I was baking cookies and watching scary movies with my girlfriend. I spent my first semester of university overseas in Egypt, had just turned 18. Conditions on the campus during that time weren't very stable, and there was so much drama, workers' strikes, disease scares, power outages etc., that I ended up spending very little time in the classroom. For those who don't know, Cairo is huge, the largest city in Africa and the Middle East. It makes Manhattan look like a little village. I want to say there are close to 10 million people living there, but even official government censuses are unable to get accurate data due to its size, which is always expanding. Anyway, I spent many nights doing all sorts of stuff that in retrospect seems really stupid. I spoke almost no Arabic, so I'd take a bus or taxi to the outskirts of town late at night and just walk around trying to talk with strangers. If I had tried this anywhere in the States, people would mistake me for a raving lunatic. Sometimes I'd meet a group of strangers and they'd invite me to go somewhere with them, so I'd just jump in their car and ride around all night. I ended up at parties in other towns, house music shows in the basements of foreign embassies, mosques, huge supermarkets, and lots of random hotels with swimming pools. There were so many people involved on these nightly adventures that I can't even remember them all or keep the names and faces straight. Never got to learn how old most of them were. Some were my own age and others considerably older, what they did for a living, or much of anything else about who they really were. They just offered to take me along for the ride. I didn't drink alcohol or use any drugs during that time, but there are still entire weeks that are now a blur to me. I did very little sleeping. Two memories that stand out in my mind are walking around the top floor of a dilapidated high-rise hotel, and stumbling upon a seedy exotic animal dealer in the basement of an apartment building. He sold all kinds of endangered animals captured in sub-Saharan Africa, including lion cubs. I'd go into the weirdest shops and meet the craziest people. There was a young couple, 30s, whom I am especially thankful to have known. They spoke good English, and the man had a British accent. They used to drive me all over at night to these huge, sprawling neighborhoods where we'd just walk the streets. I think I met them at a mall. There was another guy whom everyone else seemed nervous around. I called him the pirate. Good times, but I'd never try that again. My parents didn't know sesh during my teenage years. My mom had pretty severe mental health issues, and my father had a level of apathy rivaling that of a serial killer. Now, I was always kind of quiet and bookish, so I had no desire to go to parties or whatever. Dad also had an alcohol problem, so I was never too keen on drinking or drugs. Once, though, my rich friend's brother was taking him and a few of my friends to the city, New York. He asked if I could tag along with them, and I come from small-town USA and had never been there before, despite the fact that we aren't really that far. Upstate New York is super rural, but if you drive a few hours down south, you'll hit the city. I went out with them at about 6 a.m., and didn't come back until midnight. We didn't really do anything dangerous or risky, sightseeing, M&M store, etc. But now that I look back on it, I never even asked them for permission. I just got on a train, left for a giant metropolis, and didn't come back for 16 hours. They never even asked to know where I went. Always late to these threads, but I have such a perfect story here. My first boyfriend was my senior year of high school. He lived in a different city about an hour and a half away and it was rare that I'd be able to see him. His truck had just been totaled and my parents wouldn't let me have my own car, so it was a question of asking one of them on the weekends if I could borrow their cars. That was a hassle in and of itself. So I started being a bad kid for the first time in my life. I would wait until about 2 to 3 a.m., sneak upstairs, grab the keys, and sneak out. I would push in the clutch to roll out of the long driveway before even starting this car. This almost got me in big trouble once when the steering column locked, and from there I would drive down to see my boyfriend for a few hours. I'd be home before I had to wake up for school and before my parents got up. The kicker is, one day I was absolutely exhausted, and had no business driving. My eyes were crossing and I was basically in and out while driving through a small town on the way home. My eyes shut and bump. What the fake? So I slammed on the brakes. I was only doing maybe 30, and looked behind me as a deer was scrambling to stand up and run away. Thankfully it wasn't too hurt. But I was gonna be if my dad realized what I had been doing. I called my boyfriend in a panic and took a few years off his life as I drove through the next few towns until I could stop at a secluded car wash area. There was a slight dent in the front bumper and a ton of hair stuffed up in there. I did my best with the hair and to reattach the hanging area of the bumper. Drove back home, still panicked, got in the door and got into the kitchen just as my parents' bedroom door opened. I thought I was dead meat. Dad didn't even notice I was there as he beelined to the bathroom. Some guardian angel or something was on my side that night. They will never know. I was the candy girl. I started selling candy in the 3rd grade. I made about $40 a day which I would use to buy more candy and sell the next day. Once I reached high school, it became harder to keep selling candy without getting caught by the teachers. The day I finally got caught, the teacher yelled at me to go to the dean's office and that I would be suspended. My high school self quickly explained to the teacher that I needed to sell candy because I was the sole provider in my family. I told her that my parents expected me to bring home at least $50 or that I would sleep outside with nothing but a towel to lay on. I sadly explained to her how difficult it was for me and that I didn't want to but that I had no choice. For me. For my family. If you guys haven't figured it out. I was lying. She asked me if I needed help from services and I said no because they have never hit me. Close one, right? But needless to say, every time it was parent night for teachers to meet them. My parents were given the cold shoulder and treated kind of rudely. They actually stopped going because they didn't like my teachers, which led me to believe that the one teacher I explained my sad situation to had told other teachers. Especially because every time I was positive I had been caught by a teacher, they would smile and look away, and also because, my geometry teacher. The one it all started with. She bought candy for me every day for the rest of the year. To this day my parents talk about how rude my teachers were, and to this day I'm too much of a chicken to tell them it was my fault. I was 16 and had a younger sister about 7 years younger than me. Anyways, my mom worked 2 jobs and always left her with me to watch. Usually I was a good babysitter, made her dinner, played games with her, etc. This one night however, I had to babysit her unexpectedly, which sucked because I had planned on tripping on mushrooms with a few close friends. My mom left and I informed my buds, but told them we could take a trip to my house since mom was gone. My little sister was a tattletale and always got me into trouble. Flash forward. I'm in the kitchen making mushroom tea. She walks up and asks what I'm doing. Knowing that she's obsessed with Harry Potter, I tell her I was making a wizard's potion. She yells out that she'll tell mom I had friends over if I didn't give her some. I feel extorted and get pissed. Yeah, I could have given her just regular tea, but I'm pissed in my adolescent mind and say fake it. I give her a coffee mug of mushroom tea. I know it's faked up. An hour later, everyone is tripping, including her. We all wound up having a great time and she is hot to experience the Lion King on a whole nother plane of existence. I told her about it years later when she was 16 and we both laughed. But goddamn, I hope my mom never finds out. May, I always get a kick out of telling my parents stupid sesh that I did that they didn't know about. They do the same as well. We're glad you never knew about this when you were a kid. Tells a horrible embarrassing story about high school. Oh yeah, remember that time I got a speeding ticket for 80 and a 70? I scratched out 104 and wrote 80 and you didn't notice. Ha. I have a pretty good relationship with my parents. Edit. Now that I think about it, I did a ton of terrible sesh growing up and hid it well, and I think I've pretty much told them all of it at this point. I'm 34 now. My good friend owned a retired undercover cop car. We planned a trip out to my cottage one weekend and we thought it would be absolutely hilarious to purchase an emergency cop light to prank some unsuspecting people. It was Saturday night at around 2 a.m., the time that the local bar closes around my cabin. We sat on the side of a gravel road in hopes of spooking anyone driving back to their cabin from the bar. Yes, I realize how stupid of an idea this was, but we were in grade 11 and had zero common sense at the time. I know, no excuses for stupidity. Our first victim absolutely gunned it away. After roughly 10 seconds of trying to keep up to them going 150 kilometers per hour, we decided to stop and pull a U-turn on the highway. We were way in over our heads. We never actually thought people would be fooled by this, but we decided to go back to the gravel road. Second person actually pulled over and then we panicked because we didn't want them to see our license plate. Another U-turn and rip away. After the second car, it had clicked in our heads that what we were doing was beyond dangerous. On the ride back to my cabin we didn't say a word to each other. We sat there internalizing the fact that we had broken some punishable laws and it wouldn't have been just a smack on the wrist if we got caught. If you're an adrenaline junkie looking for your next fix, I highly suggest trying to emulate the above. Also, I have never told my parents, as my father would disown me for being a large donkey fake up of a son. This is something I am not proud of. When I was in junior high I was really good at getting things I should not have. Somehow, I got myself some live ammunition, even though there were no guns in my house. At some point, I thought it would be a good idea to trade this live round, a .22 LR, to a kid I knew. He was in the 5th grade. Fast forward a few weeks and I am home for some reason and I get the mail. In it is a letter from the dad of the dude who I gave the ammo to. It wasn't sealed, so I opened it and read it. Turns out, the kid not only took the round to school, but he set it off using a rock during recess. He, obviously, got in a faking seckload of trouble. The dad wanted to tell my stepdad, so I might share in my part of the blame. Aw, hell nah, thought my 7th or 8th grade brain, not sure exactly how old I was. That letter was promptly destroyed. Looking back, I don't know if I have ever told anyone this story. It has been like 32 to 33 years. No one must have been hurt or the police would have been involved, but still, this could have turned out a heck of a lot worse, by orders of magnitude. I snuck a boy into my house when I was 16. He hung the whole day, then pretended to leave my house, then snuck back into my room through my window. My mom knocked on the door, the lights were off. But he and I were banging. He jumps off me, and runs to my closet, but he gets stuck. Mom comes in, sits on my bed, I'm completely naked under my blanket, and he's shuffling around, trying to get into my closet, and my mom hears it, and she looks straight at my closet. But somehow, because of how dark it was and from seeing a zombie movie, she didn't see him. So eventually she left, and he managed to get out super early that morning. If she does know, she's never brought it up, and she definitely would have if she did. Late to the party, but I skipped many days of outpatient eating disorder treatment. I wasn't allowed to live at home because I was a sesh, and I knew that if you called in sick the treatment center wouldn't charge insurance, so I'd call in sick and just not go. Once I got myself in enough trouble that I had to move home, my dad would drive me, I'd pretend to go in, then walk out and meet up with some dude I met at the gas station. Nothing ever happened. I used him for weed, call in sick, no one caught on. Finally got caught when I skipped my last day of treatment. The outpatient program wasn't great and eating disorders faking suck. I'm a much better person now. There was this one time where I snuck out of my house, the night before a flight up to Virginia nonetheless, so that I could have a threesome with 2 chicks. Everything goes well. I sneak out successfully and walk down the road and get picked up by one of the girls, who then takes me to pick up the other girl. So we took a drive and eventually came to the conclusion that the threesome was going to take place in the back of the car in the parking lot of a local playground park. We smoke a bowl and then get to diddly doing. Needless to say, it was extremely cramped and the range of motion of said activities was super small. Well, lo and behold, I arrived back home at 6 a.m., my grandparents only noticing I was gone when I walked in the door. The onslaught begins. Where were you? What were you out doing all night? How irresponsible, you're supposed to fly out soon. And then it hits. I bet you feel like the man of the house, huh? Oh, poor grandmother. If only you knew how right you were, lol. This story involves more/other family members, but still my favorite tale to tell from high school that my family does not know. This one time my parents left the house for the weekend and of course, being a young teenager in a long-term relationship at the time, my significant other showed up. Like most situations similar to this, sesh happened. After the deed is done, my girlfriend and I just lay in my bed and chat away, not too concerned with putting our clothes back on. What I didn't know was my grandmother would be walking in the door not 5 minutes after we start chatting. I don't think I've lived a scarier moment than when I hear the front door open and my Hispanic grandmother call out for me, as I am as naked next to my as naked girlfriend just a floor above. So of course, we rush to get our clothes back on, and I come up with the most on-the-fly plan ever created. Once I'm changed, I would walk downstairs and say hello and make conversation, while it was her objective to creep out the front door and then ring the doorbell. The elaborate plot being she just happened to arrive. Wow, what a coincidence. And it went perfectly. At 12 or 13, I used to go over to my friend's house directly from school. So from about 3:30ish to 5:00ish we would watch his dad's porn collection on VHS, which was a rare treat at this was 86 and having access to porn was a rare thing indeed. I wasn't the only one, other friends did this on occasion as well. I have my suspicions that it may have turned into circle jerks later on with some kids. Never ever happened with me, we always kept our clothes on. I brought it up once with a bunch of old friends at one of their houses, because for me, it was a wow, that was crazy, and kind of funny, and one of them said we don't ever speak of that. I was really confused, but he wouldn't elaborate. In another conversation he was convinced that the friend that we used to visit to watch porn was in fact very gay. Another person there nodded in agreement, however his Catholic upbringing is preventing him from accepting it or coming out. However, a year later, that guy got married to a woman, so he's hiding it well, is bi, or is not gay, no idea. I'm still curious as to what happened the times I wasn't there. My mom always worked nights, so it was usually pretty easy to sneak out because I stayed by myself when she was working. But one night my friend wanted me to come spend the night, and since she lived about a half hour away, I figured I would ask, that way we wouldn't have to drive back in just a few hours. Well, naturally, this was the one time my mother didn't want me going anywhere, so when I told my friend what I was told, her response was along the lines of, well, she gets home at 7:30, so we'll just have you back by 7, and she came and got me. It's about midnight at this point and the highway outside of the city on the way to her house gets pretty dark at night. We're getting closer to her house and I see a deer going into the woods on the other side of the highway. I don't say anything, because in my mind I'm like, we're okay, it's going the other way. Well, next thing I know, this deer is going under her SUV, and my friend is trying to slam on the brakes, which was scary for a second, since we were going around 70 miles per hour. And, for the record, we weren't speeding, the limit is a lot higher outside of city limits. Turns out Bambi's mom was probably attracted to the lights or something and decided to commit suicide. If we had been in a car, we easily could have been killed, but we were driving a GMC Jimmy, so the deer hit the grill instead of the windshield. The deer was literally cut in half. We pulled over, called her dad, he told us to call some number to alert some authorities about a deer that would be on the side of the road, and then I still ended up going to my friend's house for a few hours. On our way back into town in the morning, the deer was nowhere to be found, but you could still see the stain from the pool of blood where we hit it. 14 years old, I had two friends spend the night, snuck out of the house and took my dad's pride and joy van. I had never drive before in my life. Drove to a friend's house probably 10 miles away, cop passes us on the way there. Why he didn't pull me over is beyond me, I guess I was driving okay. On our way back to my house later that night I pulled out of the parking spot and pulled forward and must have misjudged because I hit a cement pillar. We were in a parking garage, I just knew it was all over. Got out and there was a dent, but I really thought the bumper may have come off, I had hit it so hard. We made it back home with no incident and back into the house. 2 weeks later my dad and I are out in the driveway and wonders what happened to his bumper. Told him maybe it happened when he went to the golf course. He thought it was a plausible explanation. Parents never found out. I told my son the story so he wouldn't do something stupid and dangerous like that, so there is always a chance grandma will find out if he gets mad at me. When I was 18, I crashed my dad's car on the way to my summer job. Lucky for me, the job was with a travel baseball company, and the crash was minor and 2 hours from home. I was going just a bit, 20 miles per hour, too fast on a road, and thought I could stop in time when one of those like fiberglass/plastic barriers and plastic barrel/cone things that construction workers use to close off a portion of road that they might get to working on in a year or two. Luckily, there was just dirt road on the other side and I did manage to stop there. Nobody saw me, so I quickly got out, checked the car for damage. There was none, beyond a small chip, put it in reverse, got back on the road, fixed the barrier, careful not to get any prints on it, cause I was paranoid, and continued on my way. Unfortunately, the chip was right under the headlight, and was about 3 inches long by 2 inches wide. I did have the weekend to figure out how to explain it away, though, and I came up with the most ingenious and perfect ass cover ever. Someone must have hit it while it was in a parking lot. He bought it, and I will be cold and dead in the ground before I ever admit that I crashed his car. My parents went out of town one weekend while I was a junior in high school, so naturally that Saturday I decided to have a party at my house. One of my friends got sheet-faced and went into our hot tub, which I know now was not a good idea, and his condition got even worse and he was stumbling around, a complete mess. He eventually had to use the bathroom, so we helped him up to it. In my bathroom there was a shelf hanging on the wall above the toilet with a couple knickknacks on it, for decoration. After about 30 seconds of him in there with the door closed, we hear a loud crash. We all looked at each other with the "we are so faked" face. He then gets out. Upon entering we found out that he knocked over the entire shelf, ripping it off the wall. This caused a large crack on the toilet, essentially splitting it down from the bowl to the floor. To boot, the figures on the shelf were sitting at the bottom of the bowl. It ruined our toilet and the wood flooring in the bathroom, and we had to have both replaced. When my parents asked me what happened, I told them I sneezed really hard and hit my head on the shelf, causing it to crash down. I can't believe they bought it. I would methodically sneak out of the house at 3 in the morning to meet with my ex. Sometimes I would climb through windows, other times I would roll underneath a slight cracked garage door, the big one obviously. If I had my bike, I would bike, but other times I would walk the 2 miles to my ex's house, shimmy up the tree adjacent to the house, and climb into her window that she would leave open for me. Then I would wake up crusty-eyed early in the morning, and greet my parents with a smile and a comment that I just came back from a run. I was / a fitness fanatic. Eventually her dad cut down the tree adjacent to the house, and we weren't sure if he knew or he just felt like cutting down trees, but it didn't matter. I would do the same thing as before, except I started carrying a fairly light aluminum ladder with me. I'd set it up pretty deep on the side of the house to keep it out of plain sight, and then climb back down, collect the ladder, and walk back in the morning. I changed my grade and the grades of my friends in our high school math class. The math teacher was short-handed for the day and asked me if I wouldn't mind being his TA for the last period of school. All I would have to do is input grades of the last test from the grade book into the computer. Now for a little background on this teacher. He was a great guy, super funny, but he was a terrible teacher. I spent most of my time in his class making paper snowflakes and decorating the classroom, and he never seemed to notice or care. He didn't seem to notice much of anything and spent the majority of the class showing us random websites on the overhead projector, instead of teaching us. Okay, back to the grade changing. Of course I said yes and showed up back to his room during 6th period to input grades. He hands me the grade book, the password to his computer, and then walks away to teach the class. I scroll through the class lists, checking on all of my peers' grades. Then I start to input the test scores. And then it hits me. I could change the overall grade in the class with a few clicks. I ended up changing my grade from a D to a B+ and ended the year with an A. I also changed the grades of a few friends that wouldn't have passed the class otherwise. The teacher never noticed, and I ended up getting $50 from my mom for finally getting an A in math. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Parents work with the UN, so we're pretty well off. When I was 16 I snuck the Jeep out of the garage with my best friend by pushing it while it was off and in neutral gear at 1 a.m. One of the hardest and most nerve-wracking moments of my life, because Mom was asleep right above us, and if she were to just look out the open window. Yay. The distance from the underground garage to the open gate was around 15 meters. With a 10 degrees incline, the Jeep weighed about 1.5 tons. We had to use the handbrake to slowly inch that mother out. As we neared the exit, the lights in the kitchen suddenly came on. I later found out that it was my little brother getting a glass of milk. Thinking that it was my mom, we had no choice but to quickly bring the car in, close the gates and start over when the lights went off. We eventually got the car out, closed the gate and drove off, around a mile from the house because the car's roar was quite distinct and would have been easily picked up in the silent night. My best friend and I went wild as I was leaving the country. We were probably not going to see each other again. Coming back at around 5 a.m. and not wanting to be caught, I killed the engine as I neared the house, letting the car roll towards the gate. Here's the fake up. Turns out that the brakes on big cars don't work all that well when the ignition is off. Realizing that I was going way too fast, 25 miles per hour, and that I wouldn't be able to stop in time, I reached down and pushed the gear lever from into 3 to 2 to 1 Newton RP quickly in that order, and oh my god. I knew I faked up. The sound before the car came to a halt was one of a metal rod being shoved into a bicycle wheel. I was sure that even the damn neighbors heard it. We quickly, with the handbrake, lowered the car into the garage, put everything back the way it was and went to sleep. A week later the car's in the garage, the drive belt is cut, the drivetrain is faked. I got away with it, but I'm thinking of telling my dad over a few beers when I get in my car.
8th grade English class. The teacher handed out progress reports and told all the students to give them to our parents and have them sign it. Admittedly, I always got pretty good grades, but not this time. I had a D, but I learned the art of forging my parents' signature. For a second, I thought I was good. Then, the teacher probably realized some of the students were going to try to pull this stunt. So, she shouted, "Everybody with a C or lower, get on the phone right now and call your parents." I don't know why so many people were failing that class. I had a D because I was slacking, to be honest. But there was a huge line that went from the front of the class all the way to the door. One by one, everyone called their parents, and I, who was at the very back of the line, was getting more and more nervous. Thankfully, a lifeline was thrown and the bell rang. I quickly grabbed my stuff and just took off. I was relieved and went about my day feeling like $1 million. I cheated death.
My parents were really strict on school stuff. The next day, I showed up and the teacher said, I have a list of people who didn't call. So everybody who didn't, get on the phone now. She even called our names. There were only 3 of us who didn't call. I was last again and it was the moment of truth. Time to accept my fate and die a most gruesome death. I started dialing. When I was halfway through dialing, my friend called the teacher for help and she turned over to look at him. While her head was turned, I pressed the button that deletes all that was dialed. The teacher didn't see me, but she told my friend, just wait a second. After me, calls his parents, I want to talk to them. After clicking the button, I had to dial the last 2 numbers to make it look good. I remember I looked over at my teacher and said, it's dialing, and I put on the performance of my life. Yeah, Mom? I'm just calling you to tell you that my teacher is making me call you because I have a D in English. Yeah? What? Are you serious? Fine, I guess I'll see what Dad says when he gets home. Okay. Teacher, pass me the phone, I want to talk to her. Me, still on the phone with my mother. Okay, bye. I looked over at my teacher and said, she has to go back to work, she's running late. I ended up forging their signatures and got away with it. I'm still amazed I pulled it off. I had a note sent home for not having done any homework for about 3 weeks. I intercepted the note when it was delivered, taking it out of the letterbox and hiding it before my parents came home, and of course said nothing. A bit over a week later, my teacher suddenly remembered that she hadn't heard from my parents, so she asked me about the note. I just told her that nobody had mentioned it, which was true. They hadn't said anything because they didn't know a note had been sent, and pretended it probably hadn't been delivered. So, my teacher accuses me of lying, drags out a photocopy she had kept on file, and makes me take it home in person and have my parents sign it. Fake. By this time, however, I had caught up on most of the missing work, so she at least wrote a footnote saying the homework was no longer outstanding. My parents didn't believe any of my bullshit about the note not being delivered, but couldn't prove that I had hidden it. I missed out on being grounded because I had already finished the late homework, but got a lecture about trust and responsibility and had some privileges revoked. The fun started 2 weeks later, when the letter was delivered. That is, after I had ink stamped a 2 in front of the date on the postmark, so it looked like it was sent on the 23rd instead of the 3rd, and slipped it into the letterbox before my parents got home. The only reason I did this was to prove that I hadn't been lying, even though I had. So, I was able to say I told you so, and got a groveling apology from my parents. The next day, I took the original letter to class and handed it to my teacher. She took one look at the postmark, and assumed the office admin staff had simply not bothered to post the letter for almost 3 weeks. So, the office ladies were in the sheet, and I scored another apology from my teacher. Bonus: never shall tell my parents' story. I faked another dude in my parents' bed when they were away for the weekend. In my defense, it was the only double bed in the house. They also don't need to know that I had sesh in the back seat of their car on several occasions, when they thought I was working night shifts at McDonald's. Twice my mom went away for the weekend whilst my brother was at uni. Twice she insisted I have a couple of friends over so I wouldn't be on my own. Twice I had about 25 people over for a 2-day house party. My best friend got blasted, started a fight, broke the bathroom cabinet, redecorated the downstairs toilet with puke and was ditched on the curb soaked head to toe in vomit for his mom to pick him up. Heard his sister say "Get in, you faking disgrace," when she opened the car door. Another friend got drunk and became really hyper, starting to attack neighbors' gardens. Took 5 of us to restrain him and I had to put a pillow over his head and literally beat him unconscious to make him stop. He didn't remember and was very apologetic when he woke up. We sent a provisions team out to get Chinese from round the corner, literally 2 roads away. They didn't return, phones went to voicemail. 3 hours later we sent another group because people were starving. Both teams returned at the same time, with way too much food. Luckily I am teetotal, good at cleaning and rubbish collection on a Monday morning. 2 breakages total. Bathroom cabinet was blamed on my best friend, who took the blame, and the plant pot was super glued and rotated so the crack wasn't easily visible. My school was a reasonably strict all-boys school. There were only about 3 to 4 house parties in the whole time I was there and I held 2 of them. Still pretty proud. But yeah, she'd lynch me if she knew lol. I was so naughty. Everything from changing report cards to skipping school to smoking cigarettes behind the bleachers to getting rides to school in police cars when they found me and my friends in some apartment they were trying to drug bust. But everything culminated the summer I turned 16. Me and my best friend went to a college party where I met and instantly fell in love with this beautiful 21-year-old college guy who instantly fell in love too. We talked until dawn and realized the time and went upstairs to lie down and then my mom's car pulled into the driveway. The stragglers around the keg denied I was there and so she left and my best friend and I took off to her house where my mom's car pulled into the driveway. I scrambled to the basement knowing I was in a deep sheet and slid under an old sofa with the dust and cobwebs and spiders until she left. Deep sheet I was in, indeed. When I went home, no Nintendo, no cordless phone, no leaving the house unless I was going to work. Grounded until I was 30, she said. I worked in a cafe where my friends would hang out all day drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and trying to be intellectuals. They were incredulous that I was going to miss the whole summer. So, it was there we hatched a plan. One night I turned my radio up a bit to hide the sound the screen makes when it is popped out of its frame. Outside of my teenage bedroom was a roof over the sun porch, maybe 12 feet above the ground, and I waited. Accomplice number 1 woke me with a shake and we climbed out onto the roof and looked down at accomplice number 2, Dumb and Dumber. They had found a ladder to free me but the ladder was too short so they wandered through the neighborhood and came up with 3 5-gallon buckets. The plan was, accomplice number 2 would hold the other leg of the ladder while the other 3 were atop the 5-gallon buckets and we would climb down. Well, I wasn't tall enough to reach the top of the ladder. You ever see those drawings of the animals all stacked on top of each other? I had to climb on top of accomplice number 1's shoulders, who was on the ladder, on top of the 5-gallon buckets, being held up by accomplice number 2. Somehow it worked, and we made it to the party, and everyone was happy to see us, and laughed their asses off when we told them how the deed was accomplished. I have no idea how I got back in my room that night though, or how Mom did not wake up.